Good afternoon, you lovely human beings. It's so lovely to have you here. Thank you already for lighting up the chat feature as we go. It's so lovely to have you here today. Today, once again, I am in Cambridge, so it's so lovely to be here and to see folks already popping in the chat feature where you're watching from and acknowledging the theme music as ever. We've got folks in Dublin. I love that Johnny notes that I still bop to the tune. Honestly, it's great. I love that. I love that opening. I think there's something so special about it, and actually energetic, which of course is what we're going to be speaking about today. Do pop in the chat feature where you're watching from. I always love seeing it. I can see folks in County Durham, Great Stokely. I'm definitely pronouncing that wrong. We've got Norwich, Glasgow, Cambridgeshire, Lincoln, Dublin. Amazing. It's so wicked to have you here. Thank you for taking the time. Let's get going with introductions. Sorry, I've just seen Marissa's who has said and broken it down for me, which I appreciate. So thank you, Marissa. So 2 challenges as ever with today's session. The first is to keep that chat feature going as it is right now throughout the duration of today's session. I think this has the potential to be really special. Last week was, I think, memorably special for that chat feature being just alive. Today is an interview sort of type of session, just like last week's was. So I want to think about today as a real exercise in co-creation. Let's sort of make this session what you need it to be. Simon and I are just here for you, rather than sort of the things that I want to discuss, because I'm a little bit interesting, but you're way more interesting. So do keep that chat feature going out for the duration of today's session. While we're there, don't forget to switch your messages to everyone, so everyone can see your messages, rather than just hosts and panelists. So presently, if you go into chat feature and you see a hosts and panelists anywhere in that chat feature, click that, switch it to everyone. Job done. We can have a nice chat as we go throughout the duration. The second challenge, as ever, do drop on social media your biggest takeaway from today's session. My hope is that today the takeaways are a little bit more personal, a little bit more reflective, in the sense that we'll be sort of speaking about something that isn't like marketing tactics. It's about something that feels far more important in a way. And so I hope today that you'll have like a really, really meaty takeaway from today's session. Those 2 challenges sound good. Let's get going. Nicola says, I so want a badge. I think you need to be selling a range of merch, Joe. We do sell lots of things, but these badges are earned. And so all of the folks watching today, you're doing a good job by being here today on your way to earning a badge. So today our guest is Simon Alexander Ong, speaker across the globe, award-winning coach, author of the Penguin Random House published, and that's not an easy thing to do, Energize, and so much more. Something I've come to realize as I get older, I lose my hair, I become a dad and things like that. And especially as I've dropped down to a 4-day week, is that actually the thing that matters so much less than, or so much more than time management, is energy management. This is also mirrored in how I manage my introversion. Like my social energy is something that I've really had to focus on, particularly after COVID, where you're seeing people and you're seeing their legs and things like that. And there's so much stimulation. It's tiring. It's hard. So energy management is important. So when I thought about who could speak on this, well, very happily, we landed with Simon, who is incredible. Today, we're going to be speaking through energy with Simon and what you can do about it. It's going to be a lot of fun. Today is a pure interview, so please do use the Q&A feature throughout the duration of today's session. The way you find that is you wiggle your mouse or you tap on your screen, depending on what device you're on, and you'll see a little feature that says Q&A. Click right in there and add your questions as we go. As I say, this is really important because we're going to have this conversation today, but I want it to be a conversation that you want to have. So please do use that Q&A feature as we go. Before we get going with the questions, I've got one last thing to do, and it's a very important thing to do, which is to say thank you to our sponsors. This week's featured sponsor is a company called The Test, who, for those of you who are looking to do a little bit of market research, I think are first rate. I'm not just saying that, I mean it. I'm a customer of a test. Really enjoy their platform for understanding. Like basically what it is this platform where you can set your questions, you set the demographics, and then off you go. You have a bunch of panels available to you to answer your questions, and right there, that's something quite special. So if you're looking to do better market research, and definitely look at a test, I'd really recommend it. And right now they're also doing a survey where you can get 100 responses on up to 5 questions for free. It's pretty wicked. If you haven't got that already, then I'll link it in the email after today's session. I also want to thank Impression, Content Square, Hrefs, Redgate, Cambridge Marketing College, and Brand Recruitment. Every one of these we'll speak about in more depth as we go throughout the rest of the season. So, there we go. We've got Matthew saying a test is great and the free survey was delivered in 24 hours and proved very useful. How wicked's that? That's awesome. Cool. That's my introduction done. So we can get on with questions. So Simon, thank you for taking the time, my friend. I really
Joe,
appreciate
thank you so much for having me, and hello to you all this afternoon. I just saw Marissa's comment pop up in the chat there, which gave me a chuckle, saying he's always on an airplane, looks glamorous. It's one of the benefits, Marissa, of the COVID restrictions being lifted. It's just amazing to get out and be in a room with people in person again. I really miss that energy. Virtual has its advantages, but it cannot, for me, replicate meeting people in person.
100%. Do you find energy from that? Do you take energy from being in person with people at physical events? Is that something that gives you energy?
Definitely. I think because you can connect with people at a more visceral level. I mean, if I'm speaking to an audience on virtual, for example, typically it's only the host or a couple of panelists that I will see from a visual perspective, but I can't really get to know the people in the comments because it's just names and it's quite abstract. And of course, for me, I'm sitting in the same position for a certain amount of time, and so you're not really seeing my body movements and sort of me doing my thing on stage. And so for me, it's the performance, but it's also that connection that we have when we meet in person.
That's awesome. And like I asked that question partially loaded because like there's even something there in the language, right, about sort of like and Nicola has put in the chat here, which is, as an introvert, big social events sap my energy. So do you recognize, is this a thing that you sort of recognize in your exploration of energy, these sort of terms of like energy boosters and energy drainers? Is that how you think about it, or do you think about it in a different way?
Definitely. So when I think about people, places, and things, there are things that energize us, and of course, there are things that drain us. And the beauty of energy management is that when we do the things that give us energy, interestingly enough, they give us even more energy. So, you know, you could do something that you enjoy for hours, but you don't feel exhausted because the very thing that you're doing is the thing that actually awakens your latent potential. And when that occurs, you just get so immersed in that activity. That's what we end up calling flow. You end up enjoying a flow state. And hours feel like minutes. But when you're doing something that actually you don't particularly enjoy, that drains you of energy, a few minutes can feel like a few hours. And so that's why for me it's very important to understand for ourselves what are the things that give us energy and what are the things that are draining us of energy, and how we can start building our weeks and months around that data.
That's great. And so like, how do you deal with that? So your recommendation there was to build your weeks and months around those kind of things. Is it about avoidance of energy sappers, or is it just about acknowledgement and then sort of managing yourself around it? How do you tend to advise folks to deal with those sort of things?
So one of the biggest factors that influences our energy is our environment. Now, when I talk about environment, it's things such as the people we spend time with, who we follow on social media, what we watch, what we listen, what we read, even the physical spaces that we spend time in. Now, even when I consider environment, there are two different types of environments. There are the types of environments that you cannot change. So for example, if you happen to have some toxic family members, or if you happen to be in a company that doesn't have a particularly welcoming culture, it may not be something that you can change in the short term. On the other hand, there are things that you can change in your environment. For example, who you follow on social media, the friends that you spend time with, those are the things that you can change. And so it's about focusing at the very start and the very immediate term on the things that you can change. And I think that's what drains a lot of people, is that we spend a lot of our waking hours focusing on the things that we cannot control. And what happens is that exhausts us, and that leads us to overthinking. But when we focus on things that we can control, and trust me, there are always things that we can control, even if it's something very small, what happens is that energizes us and empowers us to take action.
Nice. And so how do you go about recognizing what you can control? Do you have a way of sort of going about that? I mean, I have an exercise that I share reasonably regularly, but I'd love to hear from yourself, like what do you sort of use to identify control for you?
Yeah, sure. So at a very basic level, the first exercise I get my clients to do, and it's actually a diagram that I share in the book, is simply to write down in one column all the things that you feel you can control and all the things that you feel you can't control. Now, notice the directive word here is feel, because for some of us, we feel we cannot control some situations. For other people, they feel they can. So the same situation might be viewed differently to whoever is perceiving that experience. And so once we get clarity as to the things we can and things we can't, then we can begin to explore what we put down on paper. So let's say someone put down, I can't control the way that my team is. Now we can then start to dig a little deeper. For example, what makes you think that you can't control the way that your team operates? And then we can start to unpack what is contributing to that thinking. Now, perhaps even within that exploration, we might find certain things that we can control within that. Now, I'll give you a very basic example. If I know I'm in an environment in which my colleague happens to be naturally negative, and so if I said to this individual at the end of the week, how was your week? And he or she said to me, you know what, Simon, my week wasn't particularly nice. I missed out on the promotion. We didn't get this project over the line. So if I already know they tend to always focus on the negative, then what is in my control is how I ask a question. For example, changing how has your week been to what has gone well for you this week, at a very subconscious level, shifts their focus to what has gone well, which is something positive. So again, that's very little, but it's something that we can control. So once we start to unpackage what is in our mind on the can and can't control, we can see, put on paper, what are the things that are, yes, this part is something I can't control, but actually these are some small things that I can start to do that can start to influence the way that I relate to these individuals.
That's awesome, dude. I really appreciate that. I reflect on myself too much, probably, but I do think control is something that I'm not necessarily controlling, but I do enjoy a bit of control in a sense, in the same way as so many people do. So those subtle things are important and useful.
I saw just in the chat there, Susie saying language is so important, and it is, just to emphasize Susie's point there, because I think especially when we are in positions of leadership, we often just tell people what to do, or when something doesn't go the way you expect, we often jump to the why question. Why didn't you do this? Why did you miss the deadline? Why didn't this happen? But I think what is more empowering, if we want to energize others under our watch, is actually asking what I call wisdom access questions. And those wisdom access questions always begins with what? What do you need that can help you achieve that project deadline? What would be most useful for you in order to win that client? What would be helpful for you to improve next time? So what's happening is we're going from telling people what to do, which is what I call managing people. Anybody can manage someone. I can tell you what to do, go away, do it by this time frame. But actually leading people is a very different skill set, is where we move into the world of coaching. It's how can we coach and empower people to own the process so that they can show up and deliver more than their basic job description.
That's incredible, dude. I was fortunate enough to go through a program called The Living Leader, which was run by a lady called Penny Ferguson, and she speaks about this on the regular. And I think it speaks to a life mantra that has served me well so far. 4 words which changed my world, which were, "It's not about you." And those, that is an exercise which is about you in terms of your energy, but actually it's far more about allowing folks to come to their own conclusions and stuff like that. And I just wanted to highlight how important that device that you've just spoken about is, because honestly, if you walk away with that as a takeaway, that is a game changer for how you will manage folks for the rest of your life. So thank you for sharing that. That's really, really helpful.
Pleasure.
I want to take a side step because like you said something really interesting at the beginning. So I kind of jumped on that before we went into more questions. But I wanted to find out a little bit more about you. Because I know that your story has power in itself, and there will be folks who will resonate with it. So what led you on this journey of sort of investigating energy? What was the sort of trigger point where you were like, yep, I know that I need to, I know that there's something missing here and I need to do something about it?
Sure. So I think for this question, it'll be helpful to share a bit about my background, which kind of will lead naturally to what I'm doing today. So I was born here in the United Kingdom. I grew up to two Malaysian Chinese parents. And I had this mistaken belief growing up that success was defined by my job title. And naturally, coming from a Chinese background, there was a very close link between happiness and achievement. So I was taught from a very early age that if you achieved, i.e. if you did well at school, if you got to a good college, if you got to a good university, if you landed a job as either a banker, doctor, lawyer, or an accountant, then you would be happy and you would be very successful. But unfortunately, once I started my career in the financial services sector in the middle of 2007, it happened to be the worst possible time because this was a year before the global financial crisis. And the company that I started with was Lehman Brothers, which collapsed 14 months after I joined. So at that moment, even though it was very scary, very terrifying to happen very early in your career, for me, it was a blessing in disguise because it got me questioning those previously formed beliefs. Now, of course, what I know now is that happiness and achievement are independent. You don't need to achieve certain milestones or goals in order to be happy, because otherwise, what does that mean you are in the meantime? Are you sad, anxious, depressed while you're in the process of trying to achieve something? So what I started to do is, one is I stepped back and I asked myself questions such as, what did success mean to me? What sort of impact did I want to have in the world? And what did fulfillment look like? Now, those questions are important because what I've observed is that many of us are exhausted, not because we are doing too much per se, but because one, we are doing too little of the things that bring us joy. And two, is because we are running someone else's race and measuring our progress against metrics determined by other people. So that was one of the first steps I took. Second is that the job that I went into after I finished at Lehman Brothers was a very toxic environment. I would be in the office from very early in the morning all the way until late in the evenings. And there was one moment where I completely crashed and burned and I lost all sense of direction. And I had this heart-to-heart conversation with my wife, who was my girlfriend back then. And it's the story that I begin the book with. And she raised to me what she was observing. And she saw that because I had now gone through this pivot from working at Lehman Brothers to this toxic environment, and things weren't working out as expected. Remember, I grew up with this belief that I had to be achieving, I had to be successful, but now I was in this bit of limbo, so to speak. I was not keeping good health in my body. I was feeding myself junk. I wasn't getting sufficient rest. And I just felt like the only way to escape this was to watch box sets of television shows on weekends to drown my sorrows in. And so that really got me woken up to the fact that I had to change something in my life. And I think often many of us may relate to this, is that when what you're going through is worse than the option to change something, you're left with no choice. You're left with no choice but to want to make some changes in your life. And for me, it began with the physical side of energy. So again, to give some context to what I mean by energy, it's really 4 dimensions. It's physical, it's mental, it's spiritual, and it's emotional. And the reason I started to focus a lot on energy is because I said to myself, when we think about productivity, there are certain things that pop up in our head. For example, we can think about the productivity of efficiency. If I try these tips, tricks, and hacks, I can be more efficient with my time. But for me, that can only help to some extent. Yes, you can get a bit more work done. You might be able to get more done in a day or week, but there's only so much we can do because we're human. The other philosophy of productivity is, well, how do I start to eliminate the unessential? Again, you can only eliminate so much because there's certain things that only you can do. And so for me, what I noticed was the real game changer was really putting my energy in the foreground. And you mentioned time management earlier, Joe. And the reason why I think we must focus first on energy over time management is that if we focus exclusively on time management, we assume that our energy is uniform throughout the day. It isn't. I mean, I think some comments pop up on the right and in the Q&A that some people are having a mid-afternoon slump. Now, that just tells you our energy isn't the same throughout the whole day. We go through peaks and troughs in our energy. And if we start to understand how our energy works, that is why some of us are early risers, some of us are night owls. Then what happens is we can start working with our body and not against it. And so that's what I started to address when I quit that job. And I said, I'm going to move to a job that gives me more time to put my well-being first, where I can actually focus on harnessing my energy and using it in a more healthy way.
Dude, insane. Thank you. Thank you for laying that out as well, and giving the additional context on the different dimensions of energy, because that's really, really helpful too. We've got Helen saying in the chat, permanently exhausted pigeon, which I love. And Lucia is saying an amazing story. I want to pick up actually on Helen there, because permanently exhausted pigeon, hands up. Of course, we don't have the context here, but I want to ask, for someone who does feel exhausted all the time, and presumably you see these folks a lot, without meaning to go into a specific person, but more speaking about trends, what are the things that you see folks most doing, quote unquote, wrong when it comes to energy management, and what can they do better to sort of get there?
From what I've observed, both from the clients I've worked with, but also companies that I've gone into and spoken to their employees with, is that one of the biggest challenges that people have, especially if you are ambitious and you have a lot of goals you want to achieve and you've got a big vision of where you want to take your career, one of the big challenges we have is slowing down and disconnecting. And that is because, for whatever reason, we've arrived at this point in which we view slowing down and disconnecting as unproductive. i.e., if I'm not doing something, then I'm lazy. If I'm not doing something, I'm falling behind. And this couldn't be further from the truth. I mean, I'm going to take one or two stories that I share in the book. And the first is from an interview that Charlie Rose did with Warren Buffett and Bill Gates. And he asked Bill Gates a question. He said, Bill, from the friendship that you've cultivated with Warren over the years, what have been some of the most important lessons that you've learned? And he shared a couple, and then he arrived at this point, which for me was really fascinating. He said to Charlie Rose, I remember when I looked into Warren's diary, I was looking through his pages, and I saw that there were so many empty pages in his diary. And then I compared it to mine, and I saw that my diary had back-to-back meetings with shareholders, meetings with employees, meetings with stakeholders. And it gave me the insight that this was no way to live. This was no way to live. And when I heard this interview, it reminded me of this quote, and I don't recall who said it originally, but the quote goes something like this: many live as if they're never going to die, and then die having never really lived. And for Bill, that was that moment for him. He started to re-engineer his diary, his weeks, his months. And it was that experience that gave birth to, if you've ever watched a Netflix show about Bill Gates, you will know that he employs something called reading weeks. He would go away into the woods for a certain amount of time, and he would use that time simply to journal, to read, and to plan. And if you go back in history, this is common amongst the most well-known inventors and creative breakthroughs. I don't know if the anecdotes are true or not, but I think there is a common thread between them. Isaac Newton, apple falls on his head, gravity. Archimedes, lying in the bathtub, eureka, he discovers displacement theory. Or even Thomas Edison fishing with no bait, so no one, not even the fish, would disturb him. And there's a reason why those moments give us those creative breakthroughs, because we can collect all the dots we can. Right now, you might be collecting dots from this interview. You might be collecting dots from going to a conference, reading a book, learning from a mentor. But there's no point collecting the dots if you don't give yourself the space to connect them. The space that you give yourself to connect them is where that creativity is born. As I often say to people, especially when we've gone through a couple of years of lockdown and COVID, is that silence is far from empty. it is always full of the answers and wisdom that you are seeking.
Amazing. It's so good. So like, let's take that one step further, because I reckon, and we've got folks agreeing left, right, and center in the chat feature here, but I would suspect of the couple of hundred people watching in right now, there is going to be no one here who disagrees, because more time, more space to stop, to breathe, it makes sense. How do you take people on that journey to start doing those things? Because I'm now projecting myself into the interview more than I am trying to be useful, but space and time, 19-month-old daughter, business, travel, events, etc. Time feels like every minute is taking up quite a lot of the time. So how do we move this from the theoretical to the practical? Up, full stop.
So there are a few things to think about here. So the first is to deepen your awareness. And now for me, awareness is very important, because you cannot have self-development without self-awareness, because you can't change what you're not aware of. And so for me, it's simply to observe yourself first. So for example, at what periods of my day do I have higher levels of energy? And at what periods of my day do I have lower levels of energy? Now, of course, if you're traveling or if you have a busy diary, then knowing that up front is useful. So I'm just going to relate this back to myself as an example. My book was published by Penguin at the end of April this year. Now, I knew ahead of time that in the weeks leading up to that publication day and the weeks after, my diary would be pretty full. I would be doing talks at companies, I would be invited to conferences, I would be doing interviews on TV and radio. And so what I did is I said publicly, and I said to people who were interested in working with me as a client, that I would not be taking on any new clients, coaching clients, between January and July. Now, what that did straight away is it cleared my diary from January to July, so I could focus my energy on the book launch. And so for me, that was very important. So if you know that you've got a particularly busy period coming up, whether it's flying internationally or whether it's a project deadline, you've got to start asking yourself, knowing what you know, how can you build things into that allow you to have intentional rest? Because yes, it's important to have periods in your diary where you are able to focus on what's important, able to do the work, but you've also got to have periods in which you can prioritize intentional rest. Think of an athlete for a moment. Imagine if you ask an athlete to train from 9 to 5 solid every day. What do you think their condition would be like in the days and weeks leading up to the main event? Now, most of us would probably agree that they would be exhausted and tired if they're training physically from 9 to 5 every day until the big event. But if you ask any athlete or team sport coach, what you'll notice is that the rest that they give their players is just as important as the training, because the body cannot recover and grow if you're not giving it time to rest and heal. And so it's the same with us. If you're always feeling stressed, exhausted, and burnt out, how can you show up and deliver your best? And so I think it's one, developing the awareness of ourselves. And second is that if you're in a position of leadership, it's developing awareness of your employees. Just to finish this question, one of the activities I do with companies is I would often ask those in managerial positions, I would say, when do you host your most important meeting? And I would ask them a variety of days. I would say, would it be Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday? Now, most hands would go up in response to Monday. And I would then follow with the second question, what do you feel the energy is like of your team first thing on a Monday morning? Now, I would often get a bit of a chuckle, a bit of a laugh, because now they see where I'm going with the question. And I said, do you see that there is a bit of misalignment here? You're putting your most important meeting on a Monday, the very day that you're telling me that the energy of your team isn't at its highest. And so what happens is, I said, imagine if you were to put your most important meeting on a Tuesday afternoon or Wednesday morning. Imagine how energized your employees would feel coming into that meeting and more likely contributing and sharing their input. And so it's awareness just not of the self, but awareness of the people that we're leading so that we can get the most out of them. And so it begins with awareness. reflecting on when are your periods of high and low energy. If you have a particularly busy period coming up, how can you prioritize that me time? How can you prioritize periods of intentional rest? Because I guarantee you that when you're checking your emails and you get something come through that's a work meeting, you're going to be very quick to click yes to reply. If a social event comes up, you'll be quick to click yes. If a holiday plan comes up, yep, you'll be quick to click yes. But how quick are you in scheduling in me time? And if you don't schedule in me time, there will always be something that would take that time away from you.
Thank you. Thank you. Sincerely, it's really, really lovely. I want to overshare because I think I know the answer to this in a way, but I think the validation feels nice in a way, which is me time sometimes feels selfish, and appreciate where the answer is going to go. But how do you work past that? How do you work past, acknowledging the importance of me time? How do you work past it? Is it as simple as just sort of saying it's not selfish, get over it?
Sure. So, I mean, I'll share a personal story which probably speaks to what you've just shared, Joe, and how I've managed it. Now, one of the positives from, there were two positives that came from COVID. One is I got the book deal with Penguin, and second is my wife and I became parents for the first time. And when we were thinking about putting our child into nursery, we had a bit of guilt, because we wanted a bit of me time. We thought we could not spend 24/7 with our child. And just to give context, our family are not based in the UK. So my wife's side of the family, they're based in America. My side of the family are based in Asia. And so it was just us. And I remember talking to my wife and about this, do we use a childminder? Do we use a nanny? Do we send our child to nursery? And we kind of felt guilty because we couldn't be there to look after our daughter, to spend time with her. But then we took a step back and we realized that if we were with her 24/7, we would be exhausted. And that was no way to spend time with our child, because when you're exhausted, you can get very emotionally reactive. You don't see things from an objective point of view, and you can get caught up in the moment. And what we realized is that by spending time with our daughter in childcare, whether that's nursery or with a nanny, that gave us time to focus on ourselves, to work out, to meditate, to do the things that are helpful for our well-being. And so when we did spend time with our daughter, we could be even more present. And so actually we saw it from that perspective. It became so useful. And looking at it from that lens, it wasn't selfish. It's that we could become better parents by actually having more me time. If I could have more me time, then when I do spend time with my child, then I can show up as a better parent. And so in a way, the people that spend time with you, if you've had the me time, they're going to get the best Joe, the best Simon from the time they spend with us. Because I think ultimately people don't want our time as much as they want our energy. I could say I spend my evenings with my daughter. I might say I spend 2 hours with her, but if I'm just on my phone the whole time, then she doesn't have my energy. But if I spend energy with her, I'm completely present with her, I'm playing with her, I'm having quality time, that's what they want. And so for me, it's not a selfish thing. For me, we have to view it as if we take care of ourselves, then the world gets the best version of us possible.
Spot on. Thank you. I really appreciate that quote. People don't want your time, they want your energy. I think that's really lovely and quite profound, actually. So I appreciate it. I can see there's a bunch of comments coming through specifically in the context of parenting here, where folks are really resonating with everything you say, but also the context in which you're saying it. So yeah, I guess it's also nice in a way to sort of have a solidarity in knowing that you're not alone as well on these sort of things. So it's good. There's some fabulous questions in the Q&A, and I want to make sure that we take the time to and answer these. So I'll ask a favor of folks watching in as well. Right now there's 12 open questions, and there's some that have got thumbs up next to them. If you see a question that you like, and make sure to scroll down to the bottom as well, because there'll be some questions that have been asked later. If there's some questions that you'd like answered, give it a thumbs up, and that will mean that we'll prioritize those questions. Right now, the top question comes from Joe, which is also in a very similar spirit to Tom, who mentioned having a post-lunch slump right now. So Joe's question here is, do you have any top tips on how to give yourself a quick boost of energy and focus when overwhelmed and short on both time and energy? Overwhelm is where Joe sees their energy disappear the most.
Well, I'm going to focus on energy here, and here's the reasons. Because if you have no energy, you can be time rich, but you will still waste that time. But when you have energy, even when you're time poor, you'll be surprised at what you can get done in a very short amount of time when you have the energy. So for me, I'll share with you a couple of examples of things that you can do, and they're going to touch in various ways between the physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual. Now, sometimes from a mental perspective, we simply have to disconnect. And again, I don't know the context, I don't know the background of the question, but it may be because you're spending most of your time indoors, sat on a chair. Now, one of the easiest things we can do is get up and move our body. Once we move our body, whether it's just going out for a walk, spending time in nature, doing some exercise, that can start to change the chemistry in our body. And that can make us go back in front of our desk or in front of the laptop with a much clearer mind. Now, of course, if it's to do with a situation you're in or a challenge you're going through, then I will probably lean into something more on the emotional energy side. And emotional energy is all about how we relate to ourselves and how we connect to the situation and our ability to be in the present. And one of the most powerful activities that we can do to uplift our energy immediately in the moment is gratitude with intention. And there's a great exercise in I think it's the second chapter of the book that I get readers to do. And I'll share with you the 3 steps if you want to give this a go and just notice what you notice. The first step is to think about the first person that comes to mind that you can be grateful for. So it could be a partner, it could be a colleague, it could be a close friend, it could be an acquaintance. So whoever that person that comes to your mind first is, jot down their name. The second step of this exercise is to write down why in as much detail as possible. So you want to get specific here. What is it that made you think about them? What have they done that you can be particularly grateful for? How have they supported you? What would life be like if they didn't do what they did? So start to get really specific in the detail. And there's a reason for this in the third part. The third part of this exercise is to pick up your phone. It's to dial their number, call them, and tell them exactly what you wrote down in step 2. Now, if that is a step too far for you, then a compromise step is to drop them a voice note. So record a voice note and send it to them over WhatsApp or a social media platform. Now, the reason why at a minimum you must do a voice note is because there's something about hearing someone's voice and the energy that comes across that makes you feel the place that they said it from. If you just send a text or an email, well, we can't associate an emotion with it. It's difficult for us to imagine from what place was that said. But when you drop them a message, you reading out what you wrote down, they can feel the emotion of what you've just said. Now, when you do that exercise, just notice what you notice. And for me, it's one of the quickest ways to uplift our energy in the moment.
Incredible. Thank you very, very much. I really appreciate that. So one of my favorite things about myself is that I will sit and I will write letters to folks in my evenings. If I have spare time, I will sit and write letters and send them through the post. And sometimes I hear back and sometimes I don't, but I think to hear the emotion, that additional layer is something that is both immediate in the sense that like you don't need to wait 2 or 3 days for the post to arrive, but also the emotion in your voice. I mean, we've got 90 minutes here, and I think what could happen you watch a webinar like this, you're like, hell yeah, I'm inspired, and then you go back to doing whatever you're doing. So let's make that a challenge for the end of today's session. Like, if you feel like it, that would be an amazing outcome for today, right?
Definitely. And I think also just another thing about voice is that if you send a voice, I mean, we're marketers here, right? Now, if you send a voice note, your conversion for them listening to it is going to be very high. Why? Because with a text, you might be able to see a preview in your notification of what that message says, and you might go, yeah, I'll look at that later. But if it's a voice note, curious creatures, you're going to tap that play button because you want to know what's in that voice note. And so you're going to get a much higher conversion by sending a voice note to someone. And I don't know if anybody in the chat here is connected to me on LinkedIn, but often what I do is every new connection I make on LinkedIn, I drop them a quick voice note just to say hello and welcome to my network. So if you connected with me, maybe you've received a voice note.
I can attest to that. And months and months ago. So it's not even like a recent thing. It was a long time ago. And I admired the hell out of that. That's wicked and a really great relationship builder. So good on you. I admire you for that. I think that's really, really great. I want to pick up on the next question, which comes from Emily. And this is the stage where my questions start sort of ping-ponging all over the place because they're guided by what is important to the community. And Emily again picks up on this sense of overwhelm. So I don't know where to start, but has a skew here on productivity. And so I feel my energy is affected when I feel overwhelmed with the workload. I don't know where to start feeling. I'm a solo marketing team. Any tips on how to tackle productivity as I don't have a team? Now, earlier in the chat, you've already mentioned productivity, and if I remember rightly, you actually spent more time focusing on energy. Is that where you would go with this answer, or is this something different with Emily?
Yeah, for me, given the questions about overwhelm with workload, and you're in an organization, you're a solo marketing team, the first thing that comes into my mind is your ability to communicate to whoever your manager or whoever your superior is about your position. Because what happens is, unless we can communicate our boundaries, unless we can communicate the fact that we are just a one-person team and we can't do everything, and that sometimes we have to wait a little longer for something to be complete, then we're just going to get thrown more and more work on our plate. And so I think part of that is communicating to your superiors. What is your boundaries for you to show up and do the work that you're paid to do, for you to do it with the quality you want to do? So you might say, well, I'm already working on these 2 projects. If we add the 3rd one, just keep in mind that the other 2 might slow a little because I'm only one person. So I think it's very important to understand how to communicate these boundaries to your colleagues and to your superiors. Because if people don't know, they assume you're getting on well with it. They assume you can handle everything they're throwing away. And so that's why communication is so important. In fact, one of the stories I shared when I was speaking in Dubai last week is I shared that there's, just continuing the Warren Buffett thing, because from the same interview, he was asked, what is the most important business skill that we can develop? And Buffett said communication. And in fact, he gestured his finger to an imaginary wall, because he said, if you look on the wall of my office, I have only one certificate hanging on that wall, and that is the $100 course certificate I was awarded from the Dale Carnegie Institute for Public Speaking. And he said communication is one of the most important business skills that we can develop, not only to communicate to our colleagues, our juniors, our superiors about workload, about how we're feeling, about instruction and so on, but also communicating to external stakeholders, communicating a vision, communicating a story, because at the heart of powerful communication is emotion. Emotion is nothing more than energy in motion. So if we can communicate effectively, that actually elevates productivity. But bad communication, I'm sure some of you can relate, bad communication amongst teams, amongst within organizations and even externally, can kill productivity and cost you financially. And so I think, going back to the question, how can you start to communicate your boundaries to other people so that you can start protecting your time in a way that allows you to keep that quality high? Otherwise, if you start to sacrifice the quality, that's actually going to hurt you in the longer term.
Thank you. That's really appreciated. Again, I feel like I just say that to every answer, but I mean it, because communication is, once again, I felt the power of it only this week in my own life. I won't go into it more, but it's the essence. And I think so often a lot of the challenges that we face in marketing, not only on a personal level, but also in the ability to do our job, for example, getting the board to buy into marketing, etc., is all about communication, taking people on the journey. I think the quicker we acknowledge that we're just a bunch of people making up this business thing as we go along, the easier it is to kind of have these communications where it's like, actually, you're making it up and I'm making it up, but if we make it up better together, then it sounds pretty good. Let's take a question from Tom, because we spoke a little bit earlier about giving team energy and the rest of your team. And actually, what we're experiencing right now in 2022 is very different to 2019. So Tom asks, I'm a 95% home worker. Do you have any thoughts on engagement and sort of bringing energy when many of Tom's other home team workers are also office based? Do you have any reflections on these past couple of years and bringing energy to work, and also energy in sort of remote locations?
Definitely. I mean, I first of all, I can connect with a lot of you here, because one of my favorite activities when I run my business is the creative side. I love the marketing, I love the PR side of my business. And I think one of the benefits of enjoying that part of running my business is that it opens my eyes to how other people do things. So I'm always trying to codify the mechanics of how successful leaders, successful teams, and successful organizations do what they do. So if you're spending most of your time working from home, then of course, to make it more enjoyable, to make it more interactive, you got to think a bit creatively. I mean, it's a very different way of working. And so, you know, if I take my book launch as an example, then I'm going to bring it back to the question. Now, I could have saw the book launch as just, you know, people go to Waterstones, people go to Amazon, they click purchase, and they get my copy of the book landing on their doorstep. But for me, knowing the importance of story, and, you know, going back to story and communication, I wanted to give people an experience, something that they could connect with. And so some of the things that we did included partnering with the Connaught Hotel. So they came up with a cocktail inspired by the book Energize, which you could order at the bar and they could present it on a copy of my book. We also did one of the world's first book launches in the metaverse, in which I was on my Oculus VR headset and I was talking to a room of people from many different countries. So I think if I bring that back to the question of, well, I'm spending most of my time working remotely and from home, how can I still stay connected and engage with the others who are in the office? Well, again, for me, it comes to thinking creatively. Maybe what you could do if you're spending most of your time from home is that, because you don't have that face-to-face interaction that you might get with someone sitting next to you in a physical office, maybe you can create points in your diary each week for virtual coffee hangouts. So you can have the meetings, you can do your work, and you might say, well, I'm doing a virtual coffee hangout on Fridays or Mondays, and it'll be good to catch up. And if there's people that want to catch up with you on a virtual hangouts or virtual coffees, then that's a great way to start to nurture closer connections. And you can also make use of postal services. You know, one of the things that I've seen in COVID and even after COVID is the rise of postal services for virtual meetings. So I've seen a number of companies host virtual meetings where what they do on the day of the meeting is that before you go live, all the attendees suddenly get this black gift box on their doorstep. And what happens is it starts to engage people in a very different way. So it's how can you think a bit creatively on how you can still stay connected with your colleagues, even though you're spending most of your time working from home? And those are just some ideas. But I mean, I could share a lot more, but those are just some ideas to get you thinking.
I really, really love it. Thank you. And I think what you've spoken there too was creativity, but I also want to loop back round to the rest of the conversation, because I love how you spoke about self-awareness earlier on, you know, and that feeling really, really important. You've spoken about me time. You've spoken about, you know, focusing on energy over time. There's been a bunch of themes that have come out throughout the duration of today's session. And as we go into the sort of 9 minutes left for this, I want to be slightly tactical. You know, we'll make sure that we sort of take some more questions if we have time, absolutely. But I want to sort of, this is always, I worry that this is almost too high level and simple of a question, but I'm going to ask you it, and you can rebuff me if you would like, which is, if there was like 3 to 5 things that someone could do today, right now, that we're going to sort of lead to a place of them having more energy, what would they be for you? What are the sort of like the actionable things that are like, nailed it? And by all means, come back at me and say, that's a rubbish question, ask something else.
Sure. So I think there are a couple of thoughts that come to my mind, some of which I've already shared, by the way, so I might reference a couple of them again here. But the ones that come to mind first, get a piece of paper, and this taps into the awareness side of things. Get a piece of paper, sit down, and write a list of the things that you are doing every day that give you energy and the things that drain your energy. And then reflect on where you are spending most of your time on. And it's interesting because a lot of people, what they realize is that they're spending a lot of their time focused on the things that are draining themselves of energy. And so that's the very first thing we can do, is how can we re-engineer things so we're moving more of the needle towards the things that are giving us energy. So that's the very first thing that we can all do. Second is to start beginning with the end in mind. This is something that Stephen Covey wrote in his book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. One of the best things we can ask ourselves is, how will I know that this week will have been a productive week? Or even, how will I know today will have been a productive day? Now, what happens is that once you know ahead of time what productivity means for you, i.e. what would a productive day look like, what would a productive week look like, you can then start planning and putting things into place that allow that to happen. And that's why one of the most powerful habits we can put into place is asking ourselves, is planning our day the night before, i.e. during the night when we have less energy, how can you start planning for the next day? So that when you do wake up in the morning, you're not wasting all of the energy you have first thing in the morning thinking about, what am I going to wear? What am I going to eat for lunch? What do I need to get done first? Who do I need to call? Because by the time you've thought about all that, you've wasted all your energy. So if you've already planned the day the night before, what happens is that the morning when you wake up, you know exactly what your focus points are. You know exactly what your priorities are, and you can get stuck on with it. Third, goes back to something we discussed early on. Start scheduling in me time. Schedule in blocks of time where you can disconnect and just slow down. And now, by disconnecting, I don't mean just surfing your phone. I mean properly disconnecting, going out to nature, doing reading, doing something that allows your brain, your mind to just calm to a level in which you can be present. That'll be the third thing. Fourth, move your body, because we weren't meant to be sedentary creatures. We weren't meant to be slumped in our chair most of the day in front of a screen. When you move your body, what happens is that your mindset shifts. Whatever the day throws your way, if you start your day with some movement, you're going to respond to it in a very different way. And the last thing I would give, and these are some very quick tips, there's a lot more in the book, but the last thing I would share is that you've got to find purpose and play in what you do. What I mean by that is, if there is no meaning in the work that you do, then of course, everything is going to feel like a chore. You're going to feel like you're just going through the motions. So you've got to find some purpose in what you do, some bigger vision that you're working towards. And now those who understand that can tap into that in a very powerful way. If I know that if I do this, then this is a stepping stone to something else, then what happens is that changes how I show up. And again, if I can introduce an element of play, what happens is that I start to enjoy the process more. And just to give you a quick example to bring that into something that you can apply, I had a client that I worked with once, and this individual, she was working in sales, and she said to me, I don't really like having to call lots of people and try and sell this service or product. And that was telling me she didn't enjoy the process of selling. Now, that told me two things. First, maybe she didn't believe in the product or service that she was selling. And second, is that maybe she wasn't doing it in a way that was making it fun for her. So I tried the second way first. I said to her, okay, in the next 90 days, what I want you to do is I want you to get me 150 rejections. Get me 150 rejections. So what I did is I flipped the process into a game. And in marketing, we call this gamification. So I gamified the process for her. Now, if she did it correct, what would happen is that the more no's she got, the quicker she will arrive at that yes. And so for me, it was taking her focus away from dwelling on that last rejection and getting it to focus on the next, on the next, on the next. And I remember a few weeks before that time frame, she drops me a WhatsApp and she says, Simon, I don't think I'm going to get even close to that 150 rejections. And I simply said, tell me what you mean. And she said, because I've just got my third yes. and I'm starting to get yeses. And so simply changing the way we see a process or the way we work and how we can make it more fun literally changes our energetic response. Another one to throw at you, just to show how we can apply this in very different settings. If you are a bit of a foodie, you may have heard of the chef Massimo Bottura, a 3-star Michelin chef who runs a restaurant in Medina called Osteria Franciscana. Now, one morning on his way to work, he hears on the radio the song Walk on the Wild Side by Lou Reed. Now, he bursts into the kitchen and he says to his team of chefs, I want you to create a plate of food based on the song Walk on the Wild Side by Lou Reed. After the initial shock of what the hell has this guy been on? Is this guy okay? They then got to work on creating these different plates. So some would create a plate based on the era of the song. Some would create a plate based on the instruments used in the song and so on. But what happened is that by introducing novelty over predictability, he made the process of cooking so much more fun. And so that's another way that we can start to introduce more energy in our day-to-day, is how can we approach the things that we do on autopilot in a very different way so that it begins to energize us rather than grounds us in a routine in which we can always predict the feeling ahead of time.
Dude, amazing. Thank you very, very much. I love fun, joy. You can feel the sparks that you see the sparks that come off people when they have those moments of energy. I just want to pick up a few comments here because the community, as ever, has been flipping amazing. So we've got Amber who says, such a life-changing webinar. I needed to hear that. So thank you so much, Simon. And it's life-changing is not something you hear often associated with webinars. So there we go. We've got it's a Trevor Trove. We've got book purchased. We've got 10,000% yes to purpose and play. We've got people just agreeing with you. Jonas sort of saying period. Whatever it is, there has just been so much love. We've got Johnny
I've just
saying
seen a couple of comments as well. I think it's from Ivana and Angelina talking about music in the background of doing chores, for example, home. And it's so true. Yeah, music has a way of uplifting us, of affecting our mood in the moment. And I'm going to use a sports reference again because I think this is very apt. If you've ever watched Michael Phelps train and how he prepares for the swimming, I mean, he's one of the most decorated Olympians of our time. Notice what Michael Phelps does as soon as he walks out of that changing room and he walks towards the swimming pool. Now, what you'll see if you go into YouTube and have a look is that Michael Phelps always has headphones on right up until the moment that he's about to prepare to jump into that pool. And in many interviews, he shared that the reason he has those headphones on is that he's constantly curating a playlist that will energize him before he jumps into that pool. So while everyone walks into the arena, they're looking around, they're kind of soaking in the atmosphere, he's just getting into the zone by using that music to prime his mental state and his physical state to be ready for the competition.
Amazing. I love it. Yeah, spot on. It's the vibrancy of life. It's the rhythm of life that you can literally hear it through. It's 3 o'clock, Simon. We've shared an hour together. So I just want to say thank you and
my pleasure. I mean, if people have got time, if you've got time, Joe, I'm happy to take one more because I see there's a number of questions still in the chat. I'm happy to go. Of
course,
one more.
Dude. Yeah, of course. Absolutely. I mean, I see that you've been brilliant at sort of noticing questions as we've got coming through. I mean, we can take the top one from Neil or have any that sort of taken your attention in particular. I'm happy to take.
Yeah, I'm happy to pick the top one then, Neil. And then, of course, if I'm a big believer that our value is determined by how much more we have given to the world than we've taken from it. So if your question didn't get answered, or if you did have a question that you've now come up with that you want to ask, but we're coming up to the end, do feel free to connect with me. Do send me your question. I will get back to you with an answer. I might not be immediate, but I will get back to you with an answer. So I'll go with Neil's question, which says, what is your view of the 5 a.m. club? Does it need to be 5 a.m. or just a good structured morning routine? Short answer is I'm not a fan of the 5 a.m. club. The reason is because for me, it's not about what time you wake up. It's about the quality and length of sleep you had. There's no point waking up at 5 a.m. if you went to bed at 1 or 2 in the morning. So for me, it's less about what time you get up. The question is, have you got sufficient rest? Only you know that. You know, if you are waking up each morning and you're going through your day and you are feeling exhausted and drained, chances are you're not getting enough sleep. So for me, is, are you getting enough sleep, and are you getting quality sleep? That for me is most important, because I know people who wake up after 5 a.m. who are very successful. I know people who also wake up at 5 a.m. who are very successful. So I don't think 5 a.m. is the common denominator. For me, is they wake up having got sufficient rest, because for me, the foundation of any productive day is getting sufficient sleep and rest. Otherwise, you simply cannot function. You simply cannot function and thrive if you're surviving on just a few hours of sleep every day.
Spot on, dude. Well, as a parent to a young child, then I can speak to the quality of sleep and how that matters. So I love it. Just as folks start walking behind me, I think that's a good time to call it. So thank you, Simon, both for this session, but also the kind offer of saying that you'll get back to people. That's not something to be underestimated. So that's really, really appreciated as well. Honestly, thank you to everyone for taking the time to tune in today. Hopefully, once again, you've got that feel that, you know, this is a session for everyone here. And Simon and I have just been conduits for you. So hopefully you've enjoyed it. The chat feature certainly looks like it did.
I'll leave, if I can, Joe, I'll leave with a final takeaway, which is this.
Of course.
To master your life, you must master your days. To master your days, you must master your time. And to master your time, you must master your energy. Thank you so much for watching and listening. And I look forward to connecting with you again in the future.
No more words need to be said. Thank you very much. See you soon.